So you want to come to Canada, but you're wondering how exactly you can travel to Canada. In today's video, I will be talking to you about how exactly you can travel to Canada for absolute beginners. So if you're someone who has never heard of the different pathways to travel to Canada, this video is for you. If this is the first video that you're watching for me, hi, my name is Trudian, but you can call me TP. And today I'm just going to be going through the different pathways to travel to Canada. So just a little backstory about me. I came to Canada as an international student and now I work in Canada. Now I have been in Canada for almost 4 years so far, and there are a lot of different pathways that you can use to come to Canada. So ultimately there are two broad ways to travel to Canada, and those two broad ways is either to come to Canada as a temporary person or come to Canada as a permanent individual. Now in these two options, there are many options for you to choose from, so definitely keep on watching this video so that you can hear all the different ways that you can travel to Canada. Now, when it comes to temporary residents, there are multiple different streams for you to come as a temporary resident. The first one is as an international student, and that is the way that I came to Canada, as an international student. Now, the hardest part to come to Canada as an international student is the tuition, because international tuition is very expensive. So because of that, that's going to be the most expensive pathway for you to come to Canada. The second way that you can come to Canada is as a worker. Now there are two different types of ways that you can come to Canada as a worker, and I'm going to be going in more details on each in a different video because it's a lot of information on the two different pathways. But ultimately there are two overall pathway. The first one is that you can come to Canada with an open work permit, and the second one is that you can come to Canada on an employee specific work permit. Deciding on which pathway you should use will definitely be based on why exactly you want to come to Canada. That is going to be your way of deciding which pathway you choose. So let's say, for example, you want to come to Canada to earn extra money, then one of the best pathways you could use is to come to Canada as a worker because you want to make money. If you want to come to Canada as a student, let's say you want to further your education, then coming to Canada as a student would be a better idea. So that's basically how you can decide on how you want to come to Canada. But there are multiple different ways that you can come individually, and it all depends on what exactly are your goals. Now, the next way that you can come to Canada is as a visitor. So when you come to Canada as a visitor, you can come for 6 months or less. And usually for a visitor's visa, you'd get about 5 years on that visa. Now, one of the biggest things you should know with a visitor's visa is that you're coming to Canada as a visitor. So you're only here as someone who wants to tour the country, look at the country. That's what a visitor allows you to do. You will not be able to work on a visitor's visa. You also wouldn't be able to study on a visa. However, if you have a visitor's visa, there are exemptions where if your program is less than 6 months, you can do that program on a visitor's visa. So that is a great way where you can get a small program under your belt while being in Canada on a visitor's visa. But ideally, even if it's a 6-month program and you would like to extend it, it would be best that you get a study permit nevertheless. The next visa that you can get, this visa would be based on persons who are permanent residents in Canada and they have parents or grandparents outside of the country. So if you happen to be watching this video and you are in Canada and you're wondering if there is any way that you can help your parents to come to Canada or your grandparents to come to Canada, there is a pathway where your parents or grandparents can come to Canada for up to 5 years at a time, and that visa is called a super visa. So basically, if your your parents want to come to Canada and they want to come for more than 6 months, then the super visa would be a great one. The only difference between a visitor's visa versus the super visa for a parent is that you would have to have medical covered. So you would have to actually get medical insurance for them and make sure that that is being paid each and every month. So the easiest ways that you can come to Canada is to come to Canada as a visitor, or you come to Canada as an international student. Now, the hardest temporary resident visa to get is actually the one for a worker. The reason why a worker's visa is very hard to get is because you have to have a job offer even before you apply for a work permit. So because of that, it can be very difficult for you to get a work permit. So that is why it is actually the hardest one to get. But that's the one that most people want to get because it would work out as the cheapest way to go. If you want to come to Canada, the cheapest one will definitely be the work permit. If you come to Canada and work, you're the one earning the money, and all you would need to pay for is your flight to come to Canada, and then you have to pay the accommodation for the first month, and then afterwards you would be working and earning money. So that's actually the cheapest way to come to Canada. Now if you come here as a visitor, then all the money that is spent is out of your pocket. So yeah, work permit would be the cheapest way to go. Now, if you're wondering how you can get a job offer, the easiest way to do that is actually to go through an agent. That is because even persons who are here in Canada find it difficult to find a proper job. Therefore, if you are outside of your home country trying to get a job to come into Canada, it is going to be way more difficult for you. Now, with temporary visas, all of them, whether you're coming as an international student, you're coming as a worker, or you're coming as a visitor, one of the hardest parts of all of these sections in order to come to Canada is actually being able to show family ties. Family ties is going to be one of the most difficult things, along with showing the money. But with the money, that part is easier to figure out compared to showing family ties. Now, family ties just includes how exactly are you going to prove that once you are finished with, let's say, your job, you're finished with school, how are they going to confirm that you will leave at the end? The main thing about Canada is that once your visa has expired, you need to leave the country. You cannot stay in the country if you have an expired visa or you have an expired permit. Now, yes, there are exemptions where, let's say, for example, before your paperwork expired, you applied for something else. Therefore, you would automatically be under implied status. So if you're in implied status, that is a way where your paperwork is expired, but you are implied into whatever you applied for. So if you're on a study permit and you apply to extend that study permit and the original study permit is expired, then the extended one, it's implied that you will get that extended one. So therefore you would be in implied status, which just means that you can still stay in the country, you can still study in the country, even though your paperwork is expired. Outside of that, once your paperwork is close to expiry, you have to leave the country. So that is why the hardest part is to prove that you will actually leave at the end of it all. With temporary permits, you have to prove that you will leave. So some of the family ties that you can show is one, your job. Let's say, for example, you're coming to Canada as a visitor. Showing your job is one of the easiest things to do. If you are jobless and you want to come to Canada as a visitor, that would not work. You have to show that there's something tying you back to your country. And you also need to show that you have money. Another way to show family ties is also to show your obligation into your country. So let's say, for example, in your home country, you have your water bill, you have your electricity bill, you have your internet bill, and they are still connected and you're still getting bills and you still have to pay them. That is showing obligation that you have to return to your home country because you are paying these bills. So that is a good way to show family ties. Another way is also by showing, for example, example saying that, not just saying, but you need to also prove it. Like, one of the biggest parts of any visa that you apply for in Canada is showing proof. If you don't show proof, basically it's not true. So just keep that in mind. If you said that you attended a school and you finished that school, you need to prove that you attended that school and you finished that school. You have to prove everything that you state. If you don't prove it, basically it didn't happen in the visa officer's mind. Another tie to home country is also your dog or any pets that you have. If you have pets in your home country, it's kind of a given that you're going to go home back to your pets. Let's say you have a cat and you left your cat with a family member, more than likely you will come home back to your cat. Am I saying this is going to be like your primary tie to your home country? No, it's better. So there are solid ties that you can have to your home country, and then you have supplemental ties. The strongest ties to your home country will be things like a house, a job, and your family. If you leave your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, your uncle, your aunt, your grandparents, your grandfather, everybody, you leave all your family in your home country, there's a high possibility you're going to go back because your entire family is there. So there's no way you're going to stay in Canada over your duration because your family is left in another country. So family ties is going to be one of the hardest things to prove. If you say you have family members in your home country, you have to prove that they're actually your family members. Like, I'm telling you, you have to prove everything that you say. If you say you are leaving a mother and a father in the country, you need to prove that you have a mother and a father in the country. Now, with a visitor's visa, you can come to Canada with a visitor's visa that is valid for 6 months and under. But at the same time, you can also get an extended visitor's visa where you can stay in Canada for 1 to 2 years. Now, visitor's visas are applied to anybody that, for example, they have a sick relative and they need to stay for long, or something happened, they need to stay long, or let's say you are coming as a student and you have a spouse that comes with you, they can also get a visitor's record and then they can stay in Canada for 1 to 2 years with you and support you financially. So those are some of the ways where you can get a visitor's record. Now, as it relates to traveling with your family to come to Canada, now this is a thing that really differs from person to person, because in some instances, if you apply and your entire family apply with you, and by family in Canada what they recognize as a family is you, a spouse, and your children. That's family. If it's an aunt, your mother, your father, that's not the family that Canada is talking about. They're talking about you, a spouse, and your children. That's the family talking about. Now, if you come to Canada with your family, it's a chance where, yes, you can get into the country, and there's also a chance where you could be sent back. I've heard of cases where people actually get sent back when they come to Canada with their family. So it is kind of a 50-50 chance there. Now, the second way that you can come to Canada is as a permanent resident. Now, as a permanent resident, there are again many ways that you can come to Canada as a permanent resident. And yes, you can apply and come to Canada as a permanent resident. The only disadvantage to this is that it's extremely expensive. So that's a disadvantage. If you want figures, permanent resident applications is approximately $1,200 in total, and that's just for the application. But you have to pay for things like medical, you have to pay for education credential assessment, which is like $300 and something dollars. Medical is like $600, and there are a lot of expensive components of permanent residency. But once you come to Canada, you come fully as a permanent resident. You don't have to go to any school. You don't have any restrictions. Like, you're free. You're a permanent resident. You come here free. You can buy a house. You can do anything you want. So that's the advantage of coming to Canada as a permanent resident. You can do anything you want to do. You can buy a house. You can get a job. You can go back to school. Your options are limitless. Now, there are two popular ways that you can come to Canada as a permanent resident, but there are way more options to come to Canada, and there are many pathways. So in Canada, they call them pathways, where these are just options for you to travel to Canada as a permanent resident. Or let's say you are here in Canada and you're watching this video, you can still apply even though you're in the country. The two main ones and the popular ones where most people go through, maybe 80% of people go through, is that they go through either express entry or they go through provincial nomination. So provincial nomination is just the one where the province basically tells the government that they want you to stay into the country, and then they nominate you and give you a certificate to say that we want you to stay in the country, and then you take that and then you apply to the government with that certificate, and then that shows the government the province wants you, so there's a higher chance that you will get permanent residency. The second popular one is express entry. Now, express entry is a federal program. Federal just means the government of Canada. Provincial government means the government in the provinces. So you have federal, which governs entire Canada, and then you have province, which is just the different provinces in Canada. And different provinces are just different areas in Canada. So under express entry, there are actually 3 different ways that you can come to Canada. 3 different pathways where you can apply and come to Canada. Now, the one that you choose will be dependent on how much money you have, what experiences you have, and all of this. I'm going to go in more details on each program individually, because all of them is very long and the requirements are all different and everything is all different. So again, it would be good that you subscribe to the channel, because then you will get to see videos where I talk in more details about all the different programs in Canada, but they can't fit into one video. It's going to be very long to talk about all different pathways, because there are many pathways to come to Canada, many of them. So with express entry, there are 3 pathways under express entry. You have federal skilled worker, you have federal skilled trade, and you have Canadian experience class. So those are the 3 that you can apply to come to Canada. Now, there are also additional ones. The additional ones will be ones like startup visa. With startup visa, it's really just getting a visa and come to Canada and starting a new business. You have one that is self-employed visa, where you actually come to Canada as a permanent resident, but you are a self-employed person instead of coming to Canada through jobs, because all the other programs is relating to you having a job, but for this one, it's not a job, but it's a business. The other permanent resident pathway is caregiver. If you're a caregiver, that's a way that you can come to Canada as a permanent resident and be a caregiver. There are also another one that is a rural one, rural and northern immigration pilot. For that one, again, allows you to come to Canada, and that one is trying to get you to go to rural areas, because most people come to Canada and they just go to the cities, but no one really goes to the rural areas. So they're trying to promote that people go to the rural areas of the provinces, so that there's a balance and it will reduce things like housing crisis and things like that, because the real reason why there's a housing crisis is because everyone lives in one area and then the other areas are empty. Just from economics, you know that once the demand is high, then the price is also going to be high. There's also another one that is called the Atlantic Immigration Program, which just help persons to come into the Atlantic regions of Canada, which is just 4 provinces. And for me, I live in the Atlantic region, and that just includes Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland and Labrador. And then the next one is that you can also do family sponsorships. So let's say you have a spouse that is a permanent resident and you want to come to Canada as a permanent resident, then you can sponsor that spouse to come to Canada with you. So that is the family sponsorship, because what they try to do is to put together families. So in the event that you would like to get your spouse to come to Canada, or you're trying to get your children to Canada, you can help them. If you're trying to help persons like a sister, a brother, there's no pathway for them. They would have to apply on their own. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.